I'm Dr. Mary Wild, integrative pediatrician based in Southern Utah. Today we'll be discussing how to help your child navigate strong emotions. Today I'm going to be touching on three main topics: emotional intelligence, co-regulation, and doing our detective work. Emotional intelligence is a phrase that was coined by Dr. Daniel Goleman in his book with the same title, and he defines emotional intelligence as having self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and social skills. And according to his research, a child's future success and happiness were more dependent on emotional intelligence than things like socioeconomic status and educational opportunities. So it is really vital that we help our kids learn to navigate their strong emotions. Emotions are often messengers, telling us that something needs to be addressed or fixed or paid attention to. As our kids get older, they become more sophisticated to identify their emotions, but when they're young, we can use things like feelings charts to have them point to faces to identify the way they're feeling. And then we can help give them the vocabulary and the words to name their emotions. And this is just the beginning of having greater self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Another author, Dr. Dan Siegel, has said that a child's well-being is really predicted by a parent's self-awareness. And I think part of that is because as we can be self-aware as parents, we can help model that for our kids. Self-awareness and self-regulation, I think, are the big things that we need to address when our kids are having constant outbursts and high emotionality. So actually, instead of thinking of self-regulation, which is the end goal, I'd like to think about the idea of co-regulation as a bridge. So this is more dealing with how we respond to our kids' strong emotions. Are we more inclined to tell them to go away and go to their rooms until they can collect themselves? Or are we willing to sit with them? So think about what happens when a child is sent to his room to pull it together. Usually they don't have warm, fuzzy feelings and come to a resolve to behave better in the future. Often they get more and more angry, and sometimes they can feel very alone. Eventually, often they do calm down and then they can re-enter, but the message that we're sending is, when you're having your biggest struggles, I can't handle it and I want you to go away. Whereas if we can co-regulate and say, I see that you're feeling angry, or I see that you're feeling sad right now, I'm here with you. That's an entirely different message. Now, I think there are some limitations to this. So if a child is being destructive or particularly aggressive, then it's reasonable to step away just to model the idea of appropriate boundaries. But in general, it can be very helpful when we're willing to be present with a child, even in their very emotional times. Now, the idea of detective work. In my work with parents, I have developed a nurture framework, and the U's in that acronym are addressing the ideas of understanding self and understanding your child. And it's so important that we look for clues to discover our own triggers and our child's triggers, because the behavioral dynamics in a family or in any context are multifaceted. It's not just usually one individual that is the cause of all the drama. So we can start learning our own triggers. As a pediatrician and working with kids in clinic, we often use what's called an asthma action plan to help kids understand where they're at in terms of their breathing and to know how to address their breathing issues. You know, in the green zone, they may not have to do anything. In the yellow zone, maybe they're starting to have breathing difficulty and they may need a rescue inhaler of albuterol or something like that. And in the red zone, they're starting to have more problems and they might need to take more aggressive measures. Similarly, with our own emotionality, we need to recognize where we're at and how to respond. So in my parenting book, Faithful Nurturing, I talk about an addressing stress action plan, which the acronym is ASAP, which is ASAP, that we need to pay attention as soon as possible when we notice emotional distress rising. In the green zone, everything's going well and we can just keep going. In the yellow zone, maybe we're starting to feel a little bit irritated and troubled, and it's time to slow down and pay attention. In the red zone, we need to stop and ask ourselves what needs to change. Maybe we need to take a nap. Maybe we need to let go of a commitment and simplify our schedule or make a major change. And the common triggers that we experience as parents are feeling stacked demands, maybe being fragile because of our own mental health, physical health issues, or our own depleted state if we haven't gotten proper rest or food. Or maybe we're afraid or feeling like we're powerless in a certain situation. Or maybe there's a lot of competing demands. These are things that raise our stress level and we need to respond when we feel that. We can also learn our children's triggers. And one book I love that addresses this is The Explosive Child by Dr. Greene. And he talks about that most of the time we get this idea in our head that our kids are always having meltdowns, or they're always having tantrums, or they're always misbehaving, but usually it's not true. And there are actually certain contexts and certain moments that they tend to exhibit these behaviors in. So if we can be detectives and try to figure out exactly what those contexts are, we'll be one step closer to finding the solutions. Dr. Greene has created an assessment tool, which I'll put a link to in the video description, where you can go and do a little questionnaire to help you figure out what skills your children may need work on and maybe what issues they need to address. It also can be the case that our kids are behaving just in a way that doesn't fit the context, but that would have been okay in another context. For example, maybe they're inside but running around and screaming, and if they were doing all those same things in your backyard, it would be fine. And in those instances, it just is necessary to help our kids understand how their behavior and the context need to match. So often in those situations, our kids just need a little bit of education in terms of what the expectations are. Now, certainly there are some underlying conditions that can make it harder for kids to be able to match their behavior to the context. Things like ADHD or excessive anxiety. And these need to be addressed with a healthcare provider. But as Dr. Greene has stated, just having diagnosis doesn't necessarily solve our kids' issues, but rather really being observant, finding what the core problem is, and then addressing it. So I hope that this video has helped give you some insight in helping your child navigate their strong emotions, first with the idea of just becoming aware of emotions, just gaining intelligence about emotions, being able to name emotions, identify emotions. Then, until they're ready to self-regulate, to help by co-regulating with them. And finally, being a detective to observe and find those patterns so we can really learn where our kids are having their biggest outbursts and their biggest struggles, and so we can help them in those specific contexts. Please look at the video description where there'll be linked to some recommended books for parents as well as for kids, and a link to the assessment created by Dr. Greene to do some detective work to figure out where your child's strong emotions may be living. All right, until next time, happy parenting.